The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk, now in its 17th year, one of New York's longest running weekly talk shows. We're on live tonight and the phones are open. Please call in at 718-960-7150 with questions or comments. Actually, it's 7241. 7150 is our old number. 7241. My producer got a laugh out of that. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, the 2010 documentary, Waiting for Superman, was widely acclaimed as an eye-opener for America's system of education. Directed by David Guggenheim, who won an Oscar for Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth, Waiting for Superman analyzes the failures of New York City's public school system by following several students who hope to be selected into charter schools via the lottery. While critically acclaimed, there's a growing grassroots movement that says Waiting for Superman itself presents inconvenient truths about solving America's public education puzzle. Tonight's guests are in an alternative film that presents an alternative view. Their film is ironically called The Inconvenient Truth Behind Waiting for Superman. So we talk education tonight, problems and solutions from the grassroots education movement and a school teacher herself. It's Julie Kavanaugh. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also a parent leader, a board member of Class Size Matters, and a member of Community Education Council in Brooklyn, who's also a former charter school parent and is featured in the movie as well, is Kim Irby. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started with you, Ms. Kavanaugh, and talk about what you saw, or you and your friends and colleagues saw, in Waiting for Superman that made you say, you know what, we ought to present an alternative view.
Yeah, well, originally we thought that we would be creating a spoof response to the film. We thought surely no one is going to take this seriously. And it became apparent after the millions started flowing in terms of the promotion of the film that we were going to have to make quite a different film.
The original film.
Yes.
Not your film, millions didn't come in for your film.
Zero for our film. So we basically took apart Waiting for Superman and broke down 4 basic myths that we thought were propagated in the film. 1, that poverty doesn't matter. 2, that unions and teachers are to blame. 3, that charter schools are a silver bullet. And 4, that the corporate reform movement, that the business model is what will improve education. We felt that those 4 main themes were really pushed in the film. There was not the data and the content to really support those claims in the film. And we thought we had to make a movie that refuted that and provided real data to show the alternative.
Was it difficult to find people in New York City? Now, you're a teacher in Brooklyn. I know it's a foreign country to us, but they're still our friends. Mm-hmm. You're a teacher in Brooklyn. Was it difficult to find parents, teachers, or others who agreed with you, or did they all say, you know what, well, that's nice, but this is just kind of a radical movement?
Oh, no. I mean, we had hours upon hours upon hours of film and footage over less than a year's period of time. I mean, just the Panel for Educational Policy meetings alone, and for folks who don't know what that is, that replaced the old Board of Education under the new mayoral control law. And that panel is charged with, among other things, closing schools and co-locating charters in public school buildings. So just in terms of going to PEP meetings alone, we had hours and hours of footage. So there was no shortage of charter parents who wanted to speak out, public school parents, community teachers. We had a very difficult time choosing what was going to go in the film, and hopefully there'll be several follow-ups to the film.
Ms. Irby, let's talk about you. Why was it important for you to stand up as a parent and partner with these folks and even be represented in the film yourself?
It was a perfect opportunity actually for parents and teachers to work together on a project that I felt very passionate about. I'm a former charter school parent, so I felt that I could represent both sides of the coin and actually having the hands-on experience that was needed.
Mm-hmm. Former charter school parent, of course, is the concept that will raise everybody's question because the movie Waiting for Superman puts out charter schools, puts out the Harlem Children's Zone, for example, as being the answer, maybe a silver bullet type answer, that this is the way to go. And people will say, well, wait a minute, why are you a former charter school parent? If you've got your child or children in, why wouldn't you want to keep them there?
I guess I realized actually after a year some problems that were with charter schools. Primarily is that my activist voice was marginalized, that I was no longer able to be the active parent on a day-to-day basis in my child's school. They did not want us to have a formal parent association in one of those schools. So I felt that that was like very important to me to be able to advocate when it was necessary. I also met other parents that were encountering different situations with their children with high suspension policies. And this was children who were in kindergarten and first grade that were being suspended immediately. So when you see things like this happening and then you look at the co-locations that were happening and parents are fighting against parents, I didn't feel that I could actually be a part of the solution and allow my child to be subject to that, being very active in my own community.
You know, I guess I'm going to pick out the word activism versus active. You said you had, you were frustrated because your activism wasn't welcome. Doesn't some of that activism get in the way of the structure of a school being able to simply run its school, and then you know what? There's always everything we do. There's this voice that says no, 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 and then we can't continue on. On some levels, people who are managers and others would say, you know what? Maybe we do need to keep them down because we don't have the resources to deal with that. Let's just educate the kids.
Well, I definitely disagree with that. Having other children in other public schools, it was very important for me to be at the school, just having that presence. And I found that children need to see that familiar face sometimes. They need to see that person in the neighborhood that they know. My children expected me to be in the building somewhere because I was available to do that, even for other children in my community. So I know the importance of parent presence in a building, and everything should not just be teacher-centered. We value our teachers, but there has to be that clear partnership that parents and teachers are working together because it's all about the results that we need to get from the children. So children need to see that as well, that partnership working hand in hand.
What we're going to do, we're going to take a very quick break. We have a clip from this movie, which is different from Waiting for Superman, very different, but locally produced. And we're going to show that right after this very short break. We're also going to talk about the UFT and the role of unions and teacher unions. So stay with us. Bronxtalk coming up right after this.
You know, when I was younger, man, my brother was the one who really took care of me, man.
Is that right?
Hey, he'd wake me up in the morning, get me ready for school, take a shower, make me some breakfast.
Where your brother at now?
Oh, you know, all right. I get lonely, nobody to talk to. I felt like quitting school. He looked at my dad in my eye, he told me, if not for me, do it for him.
Give Josh and our class of 08 the boost they need to graduate. Join us at boostup.org.
My name's Brandon. I'm 9 years old, being alcoholic.
Hi, Brandon.
I'll start drinking with the older kids. And whatever they do, I'll do.
Kids who drink before age 15 are 5 times more likely to have alcohol problems when they're adults. So start talking before they start drinking.
I know it'll start with alcohol. I'm just not sure how it's gonna end.
Back with you on Bronxtalk. We're talking education with a teacher and a parent leader. They have a new film called The inconvenient truth behind Waiting for Superman. We're going to show you a clip of that in just a moment. Ms. Cavanaugh, Waiting for Superman, the original film, makes the claim that the National Education Association, the country's largest union, and the American Federation of Teachers are institutions that are keeping children from learning. Teachers have been on the wrong end of the shooting gallery, so to speak. I mean that metaphorically, of course. What is your response to people who say, you know what, union rules are keeping us from educating the kids? And I'm going to quote from a editorial that was in today's Daily News in a moment. But what are your thoughts about the role of the UFT in the problems in our schools?
Well, the inconvenient truth is that union protections protect children. Our working conditions are our children's learning conditions. And if you want to look at what was shown in Waiting for Superman, one of the countries that they hold up as a model in the film is Finland. Finland is #1 in the world in terms of their educational outcomes. 98% of the teachers in Finland are unionized. And in addition to that, teachers in Finland are treated as professionals. They are given a voice in education policy. And incidentally, separate from the union issue, high-stakes testing does not exist in Finland. When you compare that to what happens in the United States, 98% of our teachers are not unionized. It's less than that. And in addition to that, we show this in the film, when you analyze the states in our country that do not have collective bargaining, which effectively ban teachers' unions, they score in the bottom 5 in terms of SAT and ACT scores. So to try and make the correlation that somehow educator rights, that worker protections, that really all workers should have, negatively impact children, it's simply not true. And even beyond all of that, you know, those protections allow me to sit here. They allowed me to make that film. They allowed me to join with parents
because
to advocate
otherwise you couldn't be
children.
independent and an independent voice.
Absolutely.
There was a very interesting editorial, coincidentally, just today, I don't know if you saw it, in the Daily News by Stanley Crouch, saying that Bloomberg has the choice of standing up to the UFT or falling back into the shadows with those who have never shown the courage to stand up for our children. He talked about examples that work within the public schools, like Eva Moskowitz of the Harlem Success Academy. They talk about that, the Harlem Success ranking 9th out of 800 elementary schools. Both the guests, by the way, are shaking their hands now. English and math. He asks, of course, why have those schools and programs not been hindered by the same factors that you and your colleagues talk about, like poverty and conditions in society? And basically, he says he has the choice of standing up to the UFT or falling back into the shadows. Your response to that idea?
Well, I think there's 2 responses to that craziness. The first one is to talk about Eva Moskowitz and the Harlem Success Academy. High attrition rates in terms of students and teachers. Low numbers of special education students. Her schools have a 3% or less population of children who are in collaborative team teaching situations, 0% who are in self-contained classes. English language learners, less than 3%. A great disparity between not only the district schools that they exist next to, but also the public schools within which they are co-located.
But
and you
let
see
me
those.
just interject. If the children are selected through lottery, how could they self-select who gets into their schools?
She doesn't offer them the programs. And you see in the film a parent who won the lottery. Her child won the lottery. She was a child who had an IEP for a 12 to 1-to-1 setting, and Harlem Success Academy said, we will absolutely not educate that child. And in addition to
so then the parents drop out before the...
Right. And in addition to this, to the special ed and the ELL disparity, you see that same disparity in terms of the number of children that they serve who fall below the poverty line, the number of children who receive reduced and free lunch. And in addition to all of those factors, you have the children who are counseled out and pushed out of charter schools because they are not required to serve all children in the same way that public schools are. So to try and hold up Harlem Success Academy, or any charter school for that matter, and say that they're on a level playing field in terms of comparison with a public school is just untrue. Now, the second part of this is, in terms of trying to paint the UFT as the boogeyman, let's talk about what the UFT advocates for. Smaller class sizes. Why is that controversial? Why do you have Mayor Bloomberg, who chose class sizes of 15 for his kids, saying that class sizes don't matter for our kids. You know, working conditions, which the UFT obviously advocates for, are learning conditions. So
you had children in a charter school, and when I asked you why you took them out, you responded that because you didn't have input. Was the educational level and was the educational system and programs to your liking, and you just said, well, because I don't have input, I'm going to sacrifice that?
Well, actually, no. Those schools have mastered teaching to the test. The children actually, in the middle school where my son attended, is assessed every 6 weeks. And those tests are very important. So when you have an environment where children are being taught not to think, then to me that's not the success of any school. That just because I can master a test, that makes me a #1 student. So that type of environment definitely is not educating children at all, just because they can pass a test.
Let's do this. We have a couple of calls waiting. We're going to take those calls in a moment. Let's show the clip. Now, this is the inconvenient truth behind waiting for Superman. I saw the clip earlier. I don't think it needs introduction. It pretty much states many of the things that you're talking about. Also, I want to talk about where and how people might get to see the whole thing. But let's take a look. This is the inconvenient truth behind waiting for Superman.
We know very well how to improve our schools, and we just don't care enough about us as a society to do it.
What I've learned from talking to people is that every parent wants the same thing for their kids. They want a rich curriculum. They want an experienced teacher. They want small classes. They want room for their kids to be in their schools. I've learned that instead of schools, we're going to build $1 billion police academy. Instead of a rich curriculum, we get test prep and drilling in math and ELA. Instead of small classes, we get our kids packed 28, 30, 35, 40 kids in a class, and that's wrong. But the worst of all this is that the people who control our schools, the people who run our schools, the mayor, the chancellor of the regents, they don't send their kids to these schools. Oh, they don't. They have one idea of education for our kids and an entirely different one for their own.
The business model took this country to the brink of Armageddon in 2008. And yet we want to follow a failed business model and imprint that on top of public education.
In recent years, free market business principles have been taking center stage in our country's education reform debate. More and more of our nation's school districts are being led not by educators, but by lawyers and corporate executives who push accountability and competition as the way to improve our nation's schools. They hold themselves up as education saviors while branding educators as the scapegoats.
I think too often we are coddling our children. Unless there's accountability, we'll never get the right system.
Accountability.
It's accountability. Focus on accountability. Accountability. I would urge the federal government not to ratchet down, but to ratchet up accountability.
As two people who adored educators and education as children, and as two people collectively with 20 years of teaching experience in the classroom, we are shocked by the tone, the tenor, much less the content of the current so-called reform movement in education.
There is no doubt reform is needed, and we have not been waiting. The question is, will those in power listen to the actual stakeholders and take meaningful action?
We wanted to explore the truth about education reform, so we did something shocking. We spoke with parents and educators. Their perspectives shed light on the current movement for education reform, and their perspectives highlight the inconvenient truth behind waiting for Superman.
Are you waiting for a savior? Or hoping something to believe?
We are back with you. There it is, the inconvenient the inconvenient truth behind waiting for Superman. Can people, they said that was, of course, the debut on May 19th, long ago. Can people get to see this movie on their own? Because it's not going to be in the theaters, I presume.
Yes. Folks can go to www.waitingforsupermantruth.org.
Waitingforsupermantruth.org. Write it right out. Okay.
And there's a form on there that you can request the film. There's no cost for the film. This is a grassroots project, and we'll mail that right out to you. And the film has already been requested in every state in the country and on 6 continents. So
let's go to the telephone. Our friend Mark from Pelham Parkway joins us. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Gary, let me just turn down
What's
my
up?
TV so I can not give you ping. I'm going to make a few statements, and then I have a good question to ask.
Okay.
Gary, you and I were products of the public school system in our high school, and
True.
we graduated and everything else like that. I think the big problem is you cannot teach 40 kids in a class. And if I remember correctly, there's got to be a law, I believe, where you can't have more than X amount of kids in a class. And yet we've seen constantly the mayor has been doing it where, you know, they stack the deck. Look at Columbus High School. They want to close it down, so they put kids that are almost hopeless in there to make their case.
Mm-hmm.
And on the point of Eva Moskowitz, it pays to be a crony and a political crony because she makes about $1.3 million a year for her position. Well, I think how many principals would that cover? About 10? I think the problem is, and maybe somebody can align this, is why are we not, and why is there not a governance where when we gave the mayor our education control, why wasn't there an oversight committee? He's starting to sound like Nero and Rome is burning, and our kids are coming out number 45 to 50 in science.
Thank you very much, Mark. You want to appreciate it? Ken, go ahead.
I want to say that it's all about the control of a budget, a guaranteed budget. And if the business model was crashing and failing, there had to be some type of alternative. So what better way for them to control guaranteed education dollars? It was an opportunity. They see that as an opportunity because the government must fund education. So community control and those in the community, the voice has disappeared. All because of their need to control those dollars. It's about controlling the dollars and not about educating our children.
It's ironic, we're going to take another call, but you folks both commented to me when we saw the clip of the mayor talking about accountability, and basically what Mark is suggesting, the same thing that you said, well then he's not accountable because we have, I presume you see classes that are larger than the law allows?
Sure. I'm a special ed teacher, so my classes have very strict federal limits, but sure, we see across the city, and class sizes have increased every year under this mayor.
Let's go to the telephone. Bob from the Bronx News. He wears a different
Gary,
hat each time he calls. How are you, Bob?
I want to go back to the part about parents' associations in charter schools.
Yes.
There is a chancellor's regulation calling for parents' associations in charter schools in public school buildings. However, the Charter School Association has sent out a letter to all charter schools that they are autonomous schools and do not have to follow chancellor's regulations. Now, in Thursday's column, I talk about the debacle at Kennedy where New Visions is going in with 2 new charter high schools.
Right.
Yonkers has a K-8 charter school, and New Visions, since the application process ended in April, spoke about the application process. Half of the students will be from District 10.
So, Bob, wait, what is the point that you want to make?
I'm getting to, Gary.
Well, we got to move you ahead and make it.
The other half are coming from the rest of the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens. They also mentioned that there were several applications from Yonkers. And had there been enough seats, New York City tax dollars would be paying to educate Yonkers students.
Okay,
and I wonder in charter...
So what you're saying is there's another discrepancy here because it doesn't appear that these schools will be serving only Bronx students.
Well, not only that, but not only New York City students, because I'm sure in another year or two that these Yonkers students will get in there somehow.
Got it. Okay, Bob, thank you very much. I mean, I guess yet another discrepancy that kind of gets in the way. I presented at the opening this idea of problems and solutions. So I'm going to ask both of you, how does this war end? What is the play out of this? Is this a power play by one side or the other and the system gets overhauled? Or is there a compromise solution of some sort where we can all see our schools do better and everybody's interest taken into account?
Well, who we call the corporate reformers, they refer to themselves as reformers. We say deformers or corporate reformers. I think they would prefer the former of what you said. You know, they see this as they see their reform movement as a seek and destroy mission, to undermine and dismantle public education, move to a public-private hybrid that will be supported by a voucher system. Ultimately, that is their goal because they believe in the free market. And we see that as devastating for our children. And all the research shows on the voucher issue, which gets to the whole school choice issue in charter schools anyway, in D.C. and Milwaukee, where we've had this going on for years, it actually segregates our schools more and discriminates against the most vulnerable. Well, we have 10 real reforms that we present in the movie, right. And Kim can talk about those.
Also, I'd like to add that the transition under mayoral control has transitioned so many times. The mayor has come out with so many different changes. First, we went to regions, then we went back to districts, and those type of things are the things that parents in the community cannot keep up with. So what real reform is really happening under the mayor?
Let me just list some of the things, because we don't have a lot of time. You talked some of the things that you talked about: class size, equitable funding, education on racial discrimination, more teaching, less testing, preschool and intervention, and of course quality teachers.
Experienced
quality teachers.
Yeah.
I guess what keeps being thrown up there is, do we like the patronage system of the old Board of Education? Because this is what was presented as the alternative. And so are you suggesting that we go back to something like that?
I'm suggesting that we all have a conversation and redesign the whole system that is inclusive of parents and teachers as partners and the real community that they are really serving. That's what we're suggesting.
We have some contact info that Jane is going to put up, while I'm going to say thank you so much to Kem Irby and also to Julie Kavanaugh. Thank you for your passion about our children and the education, and let's hope there's a resolve that, as I said, keeps everybody happy and keeps our schools running, functioning properly and productively. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show, or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. And for the next 2 weeks, we'll take a look at Bronx Arts. First, a group that performs for senior citizens and other groups, and then kind of a fun show the week of July 4th. Get this, an exclusive look at incredible underwater photos taken by a Bronx scuba diver. Bronx Talk, 9 p.m. Monday nights. We cover the Bronx every week. Thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, to Dina, and the cast of thousands who are around us here, and to you, good night.